Hello my beautiful friends and welcome back to our channel. My name is Beck. I am a professional mindset coach and a medical doctor. I liberate professional driven women from perfectionism, imposter syndrome, obligation and people pleasing so they can show up in their lives proudly, expressing and asserting themselves so they can ultimately start living their life on purpose and in their integrity, as opposed to following this tick box life that has brought them all of the success so far, but none of the fulfillment that comes with truly meeting and being yourself. And in my experience, the success that you create from truly being yourself is so much more powerful and impactful than anything that could come from this ticking the boxes and fitting into the boxes of what society calls success. These women that I work with prove time and time again that it doesn't matter how perfect you are and how perfect your life is from the societal perspective of what we all typically think about as successful. That recipe doesn't create fulfillment and pride in our lives. I think we all know that we have these highly impactful parts of ourselves that aren't tapped into or get missed out or pushed to the side when we try to fit into these boxes. And you don't quite feel right until you're acting truly from that integrity. So if you've spent your life doing everything right and still feel like something is missing, my beautiful friend, you are in the right place here. And watch out for my group coaching program that's opening soon or might even be open now as you're watching this video, so that you can join this community of like-minded women who are embarking on the same challenges. They are going to be your colleagues in life, these inspirational examples of what is possible for you and showing you time and time again that there is no arrival at perfect. And you might as well start respecting yourself and being happy now. Now in today's video, I wanted to talk about something that commonly gets in the way of us thinking highly of ourselves, or even simply seeing ourselves clearly, and instead keeps us stuck in this conservative, pessimistic state of mind and identity for ourselves. And that is the fear that comes up when we think about thinking about ourselves in a positive light. This is such an interesting phenomenon that I see time and time and time again. We are afraid to think highly of ourselves. We are afraid to even think well of ourselves. And we seem to have this understanding in our minds that it is the good, humble, reasonable, useful thing to do to think a couple of notches lower of ourselves rather than higher. Or even just thinking of ourselves where we are, where we think we are. And this is just so interesting and useful to break down. So let's start with talking about why we don't do it. Firstly, I recognize that a lot of us don't even have the awareness that we're allowed to think different things about ourselves, that we're allowed to change and question our opinion of ourselves, that we don't have to accept the automatic opinion that our mind comes up with about who we are, what our identity is, and how good we are or not. We tend to think about ourselves in the same way that we think about the rest of life. Our mind produces thoughts, and those thoughts we generally accept as true. So that's the first thing that gets in our way. The simple awareness that our thoughts are optional. This is, in a greater sense, the idea that the thoughts that our mind offers aren't necessarily true, and we can question them and change them or choose to think something or focus on something entirely different. But also the moment-to-moment awareness of this. So even if you are on board with the concept that you can think whatever you like about yourself, you don't have to accept the automatic thoughts, the moment-to-moment mindfulness of actually interrupting that thought or not believing that thought when it comes into your mind about the old version of who you are is another challenge of awareness that we have. Now, the second reason that we don't think differently of ourselves or choose to think well, let alone highly of ourselves, is the part that I want to focus on today. And that is because of this idea that it is somehow dangerous or detrimental to think about ourselves well or highly. And with that, the reciprocal is we think that it is useful and an advantage to think about ourselves in a negative or more pessimistic, conservative way. And I can tell you right now that that is not the case in most instances in life. But I know that you're not going to believe me, and I definitely know that it feels scary to change the way that you think. So let's break this down and work through it ourselves so that you can see how this applies or doesn't apply in your life. So you know from the cognitive program that your thoughts create your emotions, which then create your behaviors. And the cognitive program is a really useful tool in terms of developing insight. In this case, it helps you to understand what outputs your thoughts create. What are the consequences of your thoughts? So if the thought is the input, then the emotions and behaviors are outputs of that thought. And we can look at the emotions and behaviors and cumulatively say this is our outcome. So here's how you test. Pick a thought that you think about yourself that's not particularly favorable. What about, I'm not very efficient in my medical practice? This is such a common one, whether you work in clinic, private practice, or whether you work in the hospital. This thought is, I'm finding more and more ubiquitous than I could have ever imagined. This is a thought that I used to have about myself as well. Now, people will defend this thought and they'll tell me it's a good thing that I think that thought because then I'm aware of my deficit. And even if it's not a deficit, I'm aware of the possible deficit. And that gives me an opportunity to fix it. It means I'm not going to get complacent with my efficiency and I'm going to pay attention to fixing it. But let's look at what happens when you put this in a cognitive program. Let's look at the outputs of this thought input. And then we can decide whether it's useful or not. So if you put in that thought line, I'm not efficient in my medical practice. Now we ask, we notice, how do I feel when I have that thought? What emotion is connected to that thought? So this is really a practice of sitting back and noticing. When I think that thought, how does it affect me emotionally? I'm just not efficient at my medical practice. It makes me feel pressured. And I want you to check with yourself how that affects you. I'm gonna roll with pressured for the sake of this video because I feel like it's probably the more controversial one that people might want to fight for being useful. So I have the thought, I'm not efficient in my medical practice, and that creates the emotion of pressured. And now we ask, what behavioral outputs come from that emotional state? i.e., how do I show up to my medical work in this case when I'm feeling pressured? Again, I want you to take your time, sit back, visualize yourself in that scenario. Recognize if we add the emotion of pressured, how that makes you show up. Now for me, when I'm feeling pressured, I instantly notice this cognitive effect. I feel the haste in my mind. I feel like my thoughts are running faster, but I don't feel like they're high quality thoughts. I feel like my mind is sort of frantically running around and jumping around ideas, and I don't feel like I can easily get a grasp of one clear, certain line of thinking. So cognitively, I'm not thinking as well with as much clarity. In terms of my behaviors, I'm rushing to do things. I am doing one task, but almost thinking about the next task as I'm going to do it. I notice my body is more tense as I'm rushing, and I'm generally having difficulty focusing, being present with one task at a time. When I think about that effect, feeling pressured in that situation, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate for you. Say that I thought, yeah, maybe that overall does make me go faster. Like maybe my quality of work has dropped a little bit, sure, but maybe ultimately it makes me go faster, so I can accept that drop in the quality because let's say that I'm still being more efficient overall because the time improvement is so great that it cancels out that drop in quality. But here's a really interesting question that you can ask and look into for yourself in this cognitive program to work out if this truly is the best outcome for you. So you can ask, if I wasn't feeling pressured in that moment, what would I be doing? And then you can think about what you'd be doing in that situation if you weren't feeling pressured. Write that down in terms of what you're not doing. I'm not focusing on the task at hand. I'm not completely answering the question. I'm not doing a summary and synthesis at the end to ensure that that work was complete. Or you could even say, what would I ideally be feeling in that moment? And therefore, what am I missing out on? So ideally, I'd be feeling focused. That's the emotional state that I'd like to be in, focused. And if I was feeling focused, then I would be able to direct my attention. That's what focus really means to me. I'm in that clear cognitive state with that emotion of focused. So that would be directing my attention. So again, I'm not, when I'm feeling pressured, I'm not directing my attention with that focused, calm cognition. So now you have a complete cognitive program that shows you the outputs, the consequences, the effects of that thought that is critical of yourself or thinking less of yourself. Now that in itself is really interesting insight. But today in particular, we're talking about why we withhold thinking highly of ourselves. So that's what we're currently doing when we're thinking low of ourselves. And we can build another cognitive program over here to have a look at the consequences, the outputs of when we think highly of ourselves. So let's even take this all the way and try on the opposite thought. I am efficient in my clinical practice. Notice, sit back and notice how that thought makes you feel. What is the emotional effect of that thought? I'm efficient in my clinical practice. Now, this might be my bias, my availability bias, because I was just talking about focus. But when I think that thought, I certainly feel attuned with the emotion of focus. And that does make sense to me because it gives me this sense of hope and almost this motivation because it's an endpoint, because I believe that I am efficient in my clinical practice, and therefore if I just focus, if I put my head down and do the work, I'm going to get the reward at the end, i.e. I'm going to get the work done. So it does make sense to me that that would make me feel focused in a sort of motivated way. So I think that more higher optimistic thought about myself, I get to feel focused. And we just talked about the effect of that focused emotion on my behavior. All right? So now we have these two different complete cognitive programs wherein you can actually paint out the behavior section of the cognitive program over here for the optimistic thought more completely. But I don't think we need to do that to see the very obvious difference and impact of these thoughts in this situation. You can see from these cognitive programs with just this one little slither, this one tiny example of how we think about how efficient we are or not in our clinical practice. You can see what you get out of thinking each thought. And remember, I don't expect your cognitive programs to be the same as mine. You really need to try these thoughts on yourself and see what emotions and behaviors they create for you. Your cognitive programs aren't going to be the same as mine, and that's why we do coaching, because we want to understand ourselves. We don't want to just copy and paste other people's plans and thoughts and effects, because it doesn't work that way. That's not how humans work. But I'm just using mine as an example. Now, if I had to pick between these two thoughts, I would clearly pick the more optimistic thought. Not because it feels better, not because I like to think nice things about myself, not even for those reasons, but because this thought, this perspective on myself, this identity makes me more efficient. It makes me more of what I want to be and what I'm worried that I'm not. And I think it's easy to think that if you focus on the deficit, if you think about the possibility that you're not efficient, you think that might light a fire under you and make you work to be more efficient, but that's not always the case. And that's what I want you to be able to see for yourselves with this work. I want you to be able to question thoughts that you think you're having because you think they're helping you, but they're often hindering you. And also, they don't feel very nice in the process. So I hope this video has helped you to question, what is the downside of thinking highly of yourself? Were you right, or are you right, to think that you'll become complacent or less efficient when you believe that you are efficient? And were you right? Is it true that the thought that you're not efficient, just in this example, is useful to you? I want you to notice where you have drawn these opinions about yourself and your life, and where you have these thoughts about who you are and who you're not, and do the work, fill out the cognitive programs to notice the true effect of these thoughts on you. Because you get to decide what you think. You don't have to just accept whatever your mind offers, critical or not. You get to choose what you think when you learn these skills of mind management. And that means you get to create the emotions and behaviors and ultimately outcomes that you want, that serve you justice. My beautiful friends, if you know that this is the kind of work that you need to start living life in a way that you are proud of, if you feel like you're not completely expressing and asserting yourself and really showing up to your full potential in your life, then you need to follow the link below so you don't miss out on my group coaching program, where we talk about all kinds of things just like this that make your life exponentially better. Not only in terms of behaviors and outputs, but also in terms of how you feel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one.